Hello and welcome to the Carsey-Wolf Center. My name is Miguel Panabella. I'm the Assistant Director of the Carsey-Wolf Center. We are very excited to have a number of guests for tonight's social studies event. To my left, Ivy D'Ambrosio, Jonathan Gelfand, and then photographer Lauren Greenfield. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So we'll just get right into it. Lauren, this is a question for you. How did social studies come about? What drew you to this particular subject matter, and what was your research in preparation for this?
Yeah, well, I had looked at youth culture for a long time. My first book in the 90s was about kids growing up in LA and actually how they were influenced by the media, the materialism and celebrity and image, and seeing social media kind of come about and become more popular. I thought it had a connection to those values, that I had a hunch things were going to be bigger and amplified. I also was in a different stage of life. Like when I did that first project, I was just out of college myself. And by the time I was thinking about social studies, I was the mother of 2 teenagers. And I saw that my youngest, who was 14 when I started this, had this kind of radically different world than my eldest, who was 20. And they were kind of from 2 different generations. And so, especially in the beginning of COVID, I was also just seeing how intense this connection with social media was and how it was kind of a black hole, right, where you would go on and look at this thing and I would say to my son, like, get off, but I didn't actually know what was going on in there. So I wanted to create a social experiment where I would follow young people, look at this relationship, but also see inside the phones. I thought, like, we really need to see the specifics of what is impacting young people.
Yeah, and this is a question for both of you students who were part of this, is how did it feel to have your everyday life filmed and your phones, constantly recorded and shared in such a public way? Did being part of this documentary change how you present yourself in front of the camera?
Sure. It was definitely weird to get used to at first. I think sort of when you imagine what a documentary film might look like, it's 2 to 4 people, and then Lauren showed up with 12 people at my house the first day of filming. So Lauren runs deep, but with a really kind and talented crew who made the process a lot easier to build that trust, and I think that was the main thing, was the trust with you as a filmmaker, but also allowing you into our screens as well.
Yeah. For me, it was really terrifying at first, because I think with my relationship with social media, I'm so used to being able to curate my image and curate how people perceive me. And with this, I knew that I was not going to have any control over that. What I realized when it came out was that there was something very relieving about that. And I could just look at myself as a human being, and I didn't have to, I kind of realized how unnecessary it was, all of these standards that I'd been holding myself up to.
This one's a question for Lauren. You've had a long and celebrated career as a photographer. I mean, you briefly mentioned one of your early works right out of college, but you've also published in National Geographic, Time Magazine. You documented everybody from Kim Kardashian to Imelda Marcos. But in social studies, you turn your lens towards teenagers and their phones. I'm curious, what, if anything, did you learn about photography from those teenagers?
Yeah.
And were there moments that illuminated something new or sparked creativity in your own practice?
Well, first of all, I forgot to say thank you, Miguel, for having us. Thank you, UC Santa Barbara. We're really thrilled to be here. Thank you, Jonathan, who goes here, for bringing us here. And also want to thank 2 members of my team, my producer, Frank Evers, who's here, and my co-producer, Laura Aguirre, who's filming. I think, one of the things it did was opened up the world of filming through a phone. As somebody who loves craft, I like big cameras. I used big cameras as our main cameras, but we really embraced the language of the craft of social media. A lot of the participants were creators in different ways, and a lot of times their platform was social media. And so even though the work is critical of a lot of aspects of social media, I think it also embraced the craft of it and the creativity of it. And that was really important to incorporate. So in the animation, you can see like actually the phones, not some kind of interpretation or unbranded kind of interpretation or fantastical interpretation. I think it loosened me up a little bit in terms of incorporating the phone footage. There are a couple scenes that Laura captured. There's some amazing stuff at fraternity parties and at University of Arizona, so please continue to watch the rest. She also shot, there was a scene in the bathroom in the episode 1, and so there was a trade-off between access and quality. Quality's not as good, sound's not perfect, access is amazing because you can literally go anywhere with the phone. You can literally shoot anything, things that would be not permitted before, or red tape or permissions, people just ignore with the phone. So that was like a very wonderful world of access. But yeah, it had to loosen me up a little bit creatively. I'm actually having a show in LA opening Thursday at the Fahey Klein Gallery, if any of you are in LA the next couple months. And it's like large scale pieces where I incorporated the social media as well as my photography. So yeah, I think it opened me up to the value of found imagery, which I think is a huge part of this generation.
Great, yeah. And one of the other things that, you play a role in this film not only as, photographer documenting all this, but you're also in the film, right, talking to these teenagers. And I've taught high school students before, and as any adult who's ever tried to talk to a teenager knows, getting them to open up can be very, very difficult. But your conversations were so candid. And I was curious what your approach was to encouraging those kinds of conversations.
Well, that's probably a better question for these guys, what worked and what didn't work. I think one of the things they can't dispute is they stick around for a long time. We shot 150 days. I say we filmed over a year, but a lot of them say we filmed for 3 years because it either felt like that or because we were doing a pickup and they counted kind of the whole time. But I think in hanging around a long time, a couple things happen. It allows us to get to know each other. It allows trust to form. And then I think, to Ivy's point, the performative aspect goes away because life is taxing enough. You can't be performing all the time. And so even if maybe there's a little performance the first day or the first week, you really get back to being yourself. And one of the things that was really important in this project was seeing the difference, the different perspectives, the different identities between the online one and the real one, between who you are with your friends, who you are with your parents, who you are when you're by yourself. And so we really embraced all the different perspectives. Like when they're having interviews with me, they're very truth-telling and honest. When they're living their lives, you see them be whoever they are with friends, sometimes lying to a parent, sometimes being different with different people. And then when you see their social, that's another world. So I think the really special thing was that they opened up to us all of the different worlds so that we could really kind of see performance, but know it as performance, and also see their real selves.
Did you remember any particularly interesting conversations that you've had, with the different teenagers on the series?
Oh my gosh, there were so many good conversations. But I think, some of the group things were really magical because they brought out things that none of us expected. I think in group, a lot of times the students saw that other people were going through the same things that they were, but sometimes for the first time discovering that. Sometimes there were literal things, like in episode 4, there's a very intimate discussion where somebody shares about her sexual assault and somebody else in the group had the same experience with the same person. So that was just like, our mouths are on the floor. I can't believe that this is happening. But I think there were a lot of things about group that were very healing and validating. But there were so many conversations. I think one of the things that really impressed me about Ivy and Jonathan and pretty much all of the student participants was that they had such perspective and insight on what they were going through. And they could speak about it so critically and so kind of smartly. But on the other hand, that didn't give them immunity to it. They also had the same pressures, and we filmed those things too. So it was kind of this strange irony because they're actually affected by the things that they're also deconstructing and criticizing.
Yeah, and this question's for both of you students. I'm curious about your perspective on social media, particularly as representatives of your particular generation. What do you think people misunderstand about teenagers and your generation, especially when it comes to how you use social media?
I could start. I feel like a lot of people that didn't grow up on it and didn't have this firsthand experience of being close with it don't actually realize they shift the, sorry, let me start over. I feel like a lot of people that didn't really experience it firsthand are really quick to blame the teenagers who are addicted to it rather than realizing that this is just like an addictive thing. And I also think a lot of people don't realize that this is very vital for our social lives. Like you can meet somebody and stay connected with them for years, and it's very easy to, start talking to people, and it's so important. And without it, it almost feels like Cooper said, it almost feels like you don't exist.
Yeah, I think for me, one thing I say in episode 5 of the series is that social media is a lifeline, but it's also a loaded gun. What other lifeline do we have that exists that can also be compared to a loaded gun? And so while it's sort of part of our daily lives, part of the quotidian, it's not something that is crazy to us to grow up in this world. I think its implications are disastrous, and I think this series sort of sheds a light on that. But as Ivy said, it's also sort of our point of connection, and as the whole series isn't totally entirely depressing, I encourage you all to watch through episode 5, because at the end it also shows the aspect of it becomes a place where other teens can find acceptance and connection, which I think is also wholly important, especially in this day and age, especially post-COVID as well.
Yeah, totally. It's really great. Lauren, this one's a question for you. In your photography book, Fast Forward, Growing Up in the Shadow of Hollywood, one of my favorites, published in the late 90s, one of the teens in your book says, quote, "You grow up really fast when you grow up in LA. It seems like everyone is in a rush to be an adult. It's not cool to be a kid," end quote. LA in social studies is such an epicenter for youth culture and just in general. But as someone like me who grew up in Connecticut and went to high school in North Carolina, I've seen and experienced very different types of childhoods. Do you think the experiences that you captured here are representative of a broader teenage experience, or are there aspects that are uniquely shaped by the culture and environment of LA?
I think that it's very universal now. And I know that because I just showed it in Warsaw and Thessaloniki and talked to teenagers, and they said this is the first time we've seen a show about us. I think that because social media is a culture that we share, it has led to more homogenization of youth culture, which actually was the kind of thesis of Fast Forward, but fast forward to now, and I think it's ever so much more so. And LA is the kind of epicenter, it's kind of the tip of the spear, where the influencers come, where Hollywood is made, where that image culture is made, a place where people have always come for fame. But now fame and branding is something teenagers are doing all over the country and all over the world. And these kids are comparing themselves, and other kids are comparing themselves to other peers all over the world, that their peer group's no longer who they go to school with or even who they know. But it's this whole group of comparison, some of whom are not even real. So I think that the thing that struck me in Fast Forward was about the early loss of innocence. But with social media, once you have the phone, it really is the end of innocence. And Ivy really just captures that in episode 1 that you guys just saw, where she talks about, going on Instagram and looking at baking pictures and loving pastel baking pictures, and then all of a sudden seeing a girl holding up her shirt and showing her boobs and how that affected her. And I think that is kind of the essence of what young people go through in social media, where they start seeing images that they don't know about or they don't understand or that they haven't experienced themselves, and all of a sudden the world changes. And so I think one of the things we've been talking about in Q&As, but also some of us went to Sacramento and got to talk to lawmakers last week, is pushing the age of the phone. Like, you don't need it at 10, 11, 12. I think it's Sydney's mom who says, we all got our kids' phones because we wanted to know where they are. We wanted to keep them safe. But that kind of safety sometimes isn't so safe, and also is the kind of gateway to the end of innocence.
Yeah, you touch on a lot of really interesting points, and I'm glad you brought up this idea of their conception of fame, which is one of the things I wanted to ask you about. It's one of the first questions you ask in the first episode. You ask teenagers what their conception of fame is, and they often say they want to be rich and famous, right? But they don't actually say what they want to be rich and famous for, right? Like, not as an actor or a singer, they just say rich and famous. Can you walk us through what you observed about how they define fame and where those ideas seem to originate?
Well, I think almost everybody talked about, when they go on social, they started to notice the numbers, how many friends, how many likes, and those numbers became goals and aspirations, and then ones that are never satisfied. So you get to 100, it's not enough. Then you get to 1,000, it's not enough. And then, Sydney tells that story in episode 1 that you just heard about, how she started to post, when she first got on, she started to post about her passion, which was photography, and didn't get any likes. So then she started posting her body. All of a sudden she starts getting likes. It's, a completely natural response for a teenager who wants to be accepted, who wants to, every teenage movie in the past has always been about getting popular, getting accepted. But now the stakes are much higher, and the world, kind of the metrics are more codified, and they're more manipulatable. And so, yeah, I think fame has become a value. And we heard Marin say, the Kardashians are a role model, and if I could become rich and famous by selling a sex tape, she said, of course I would do that.
This one's a question for Ivy. So in the first episode, you make a really compelling observation that people are constantly judging young women, even with compliments, right? So you look at a social media post and somebody says, "Oh, you're so pretty," or "You look beautiful." It doesn't quite sit right because, as you say, quote, "Wow, everyone has an opinion on this one girl." Mm-hmm. How would you describe the difference in how young women and young men navigate social media? And do you see certain pressures or expectations that are gender specific?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like as a woman, social media aside, you kind of grow up with a pressure to look a certain way, to act a certain way, to fit into a certain image. And with social media, it's just completely amplified. It's intensified to a degree that is very hard to live with and very hard to navigate.
This one's a follow-up, kind of related for Lauren. So your award-winning photography book, Girl Culture, also very influential, published in 2002, offered an intimate look at the lives and self-presentation of teenage girls. In making this documentary, what continuities or shifts did you observe in how teenage girls represent themselves today versus back when you photographed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that everything has been amplified, that kind of all of the trends that I was documenting have gone further in the same direction. And if anything, instead of getting better for girls, it's gotten harder for boys. And my first film, which grew out of the Girl Culture book, which looked at kind of how the body project had become kind of the main expression of identity for girls and women. And my first film was called Thin, about eating disorders. And when I did that, 1 in 7 girls had an eating disorder. And by the time I did social studies, I remember in the beginning I was interviewing somebody, and a girl said to me, half my friends have eating disorders from TikTok, and the other half are lying. And I remember doctors saying then that biology builds the gun and society pulls the trigger. And I think now what we have with social media are constant triggers, constant stimuli that are triggering kind of all of the body issues. So, I mean, eating disorders in a way is like the most kind of extreme example, but there's also a lot of social contagion with the other, I mean, Ivy talks about the kind of mental illnesses trending and like, you know, kids comparing things, self-diagnosing. But in terms of girls, I think, you know, the body stuff is kind of particularly strong, and that it's hard to find a girl now who is not affected by it in some way. But, you know, not to leave the boys out, I think we also see that they're dealing with body image pressures to kind of have the perfect body. I think Jonathan talks about that in episode 1. Also the Caucasian body type, which in both episode 1 and 2, a lot of the kids talk about. And basically this just narrow kind of beauty standard that social media is kind of telling everybody to you need to be like that.
This one's a question for Jonathan. Can you talk about your role in the film behind the camera? Because as some of you in the audience might have noticed, Jonathan, you're also kind of filming your own parallel film in addition to social studies about teens and social media. Can you talk more about that project that you were working on and how your film and social studies may have been in conversation with each other?
Sure. So early on in my senior year when we started filming, I'd sort of approached Lauren with a basic idea of a project I wanted to shoot over the course of my senior year of high school that had a lot of parallels to what Lauren was filming about teens and social media. And so on one side of things, it gave me an incredible, invaluable experience as someone who wants to go into the entertainment industry to be a subject in a docuseries, which I don't think you get very often, and also to really have a masterclass from Lauren. On the other hand, it also allowed me to sort of be creative and have that aspect of relatability with other teens in the series, and also to introduce Lauren to a couple of the teens. So for a couple of the teens in the series, Cooper and Dominic, they were people I had worked with at Teen Line and had reached out to participate in my project, and Lauren found their stories really compelling and sort of brought them into her project as well. So definitely sort of a conversation where I was inspired a lot by Lauren and learned a lot from her in the process, but also helped introduce her to some of the teens in the series.
So this is a question, for Lauren. Parental relationships to social media vary widely across the series. You have Sydney's mom who posts her children on Facebook. I think you see that in one of the first episodes. Jack's father who assists with his TikToks, and then Ivy and Nina's parents play a large role in later episodes if you continue watching the show. What did you learn about how parents intersect and sometimes clash with their children's digital lives?
Yeah, well, first of all, I need to introduce another character from our show, Vito, who's Ivy's dad over there, who's, once you watch episode 3, he is really the gem of episode 3. I think that, I didn't see that many clashes on social media with the parents. What I saw is just complete kind of ignorance and divide about what was going on social media. And I put myself in that category, before I kind of opened up this black box. And I think that, you also see like a lot of very well-meaning, engaged, loving parents in the show and still have no idea what they're doing. And I think Sydney's mom brings up a very common but dangerous trend, which is like, I don't know if I want to know what's on my kids' social. I can't tell you how many parents have said that to us. I'm afraid to watch the show. And we always say like, no, watch it and watch it with your teenagers and discuss it afterwards, because I think for young people, we've had a completely different response. They very much feel seen, feel validated, and are relieved to have their parents know what they're going through. We showed it in Telluride. It premiered at the festival there, and right after there was a 20-year-old and her mother who came up to me, and the 20-year-old said, "My mom has no idea what's going on in my life, and I'm really glad she does now." And so I think that was like one of the main things I learned about the parents. I mean, sometimes, I think parents are also addicted to this media, and so sometimes it's hard to model good behavior. Actually, there was a funny scene that unfortunately we had to cut for time where Vito almost has a car accident in the car. And then he's like, "I get so distracted. We didn't have these things when I was young." But I think we've all been there with the distraction, and even, being distracted when we want to focus on our own kids. And so I think they fall into that same rabbit hole. And I often find that filming and photographing young people is really amazing because they're very honest about things that adults are also going through, the greater world, especially when you think about your specialty, conspiracy theory, and also silos and misinformation. That's something that we know adults are going through as much as young people. So I think those were the main kind of parental teenage things that I saw.
Yeah, and we were talking in the green room before this about my work, because it's on conspiracy theory and online spread. And I was curious if any of the teens in this project talked about their political engagement or how they interact with politics online. I mean, if you watch the news or read articles on op-eds, things like that, there's been a lot of increasing attention to the rise of conservatism among younger people in Gen Z, especially those shaped by the isolation of the pandemic. And I was curious if you saw those currents or those conversations emerge when making the show, the political engagement.
Well, I think, we see in Ivy's family story in episode 3 that there are kind of different political views, different worldviews that are shaped by social media, and kind of where that leads. I think I was just talking to Dominic about this because Dominic had like a very positive experience finding like affinity groups and also people with like-minded politics online, and to find out about a protest and in this episode, Anthony talked about that, and so did Jonathan with Black Lives Matter, the way it kind of brought people together, allowed them to take action. But we were talking about also how that's changed since the election and since the alignment of some of these tech companies with the administration, and how they're getting kind of, the critical voices are being suppressed by the algorithm. And I think for young people who are on social a lot, the way they're more sensitized to exactly how the algorithm is changing than I am, but even I can see like very obvious changes in the algorithm. So I think it has gone from thinking it's this very positive place for political speech and for political gathering or social justice, to realizing how dangerous it is to have it be in the hands of forces that are not independent and that are beyond our control.
Jonathan, Ivy, do you have any thoughts on or experiences navigating politics online? Your experiences, thoughts?
I gotta think about that one.
I think sort of in our generation, Dominic, I think, talks about this in later episodes, but there's one of the sort of more benign or perhaps positive features of social media is that it can be used for activism, and I think Dominic talks a lot about that too. And so I think for our generation, that's sort of a ubiquitous feature of how it's being used, especially in recent elections. But as we see with Ivy's family and with other teens in the series, there's also this side where teens are being fed content, one related to the rise of conservatism, but also, for example, sort of more recently in terms of like the new Netflix series Adolescence about incel culture and sort of that whole Andrew Tate schema. So I think there's a combination of what we see and what exists in our virtual worlds.
This one's a question for both of you again. Now that you've moved from high school to college, I'm curious what your relationship to social media has been and how it's changed since you were on this show.
Well, for me personally, I'm very happy to say that it has changed drastically. I'm still on it a lot more than I'd like, but it's definitely kind of on the back burner in my life. It's not as important. I think the more that I've matured and the more that I'm like honestly just getting a college education, it's a lot easier for me to kind of critically consume media and not internalize it as much. So it's been a lot easier.
Jonathan?
I think for me, it's helped me reevaluate my relationship with social media. I think one, in these group sessions, hearing the other teens' stories helped me do that, but also growing up and watching the show back has also achieved that. And so I'm still sort of figuring out what a good balance is. And I agree. I think I also sort of look at it more critically, one, by the help of the series, but also I'm a UCSB film major, so we have a lot of classes that help with that.
Lauren, I have a question for you, which is, you briefly kind of touched on this already, but because you've been touring this series to schools and with teenage audiences around the country, you've had a variety of different receptions, conversations, experiences with people coming up to you talking about the show. What have those conversations been like, and do you remember any particularly interesting ones that have stood out?
Yeah, it's been amazing we've been going to high schools and colleges, and like I mentioned, we got to talk to lawmakers, teenagers abroad too. Those have been, and tomorrow night we're at a school. I think that those are like really where the rubber meets the road conversations for us, because we always hope that it would resonate with young people, but have also discovered that young people are not really browsing Hulu for documentaries. So we need to kind of meet them where they are. Sometimes that means on social media, telling them about the show, or going to their school. So it's just been great to hear from teenagers that they connect with these kids. I think that because there's like 10 kind of major characters, there's kind of something for everybody. And it's been amazing to see, like when we've got to schools, a kid go up to Dominic and say like, I'm LGBTQ, I've been bullied at my school. Like, it was so meaningful to hear your experience. And we've noticed that like kids identify so strongly with the stories in the film, and it like really crosses kind of class and geography and race, and people really connect to somebody who's had a similar story than them, whether it's slut shaming or bullying or college pressure or whatever that is. So that's been super exciting. I've heard a lot of teenagers say they like the credits, like the kind of Snapchat inspired map, or the Olivia Rodrigo song is like what they really listen to. One girl who was in her early 20s said, "It seems like one of us made it," which I loved hearing that. But we also want to hear from you. Laura's here and would love to talk to anybody after who wants to say what you thought. But that's been exciting. I know there was a screening where Cooper shared the other day that there was somebody around 20 next to her who kept saying like, "Oh, I remember that. Oh, I remember that," and was like nostalgic for the social media of this time. Like, it seems kind of universal or representative, but I think for this generation, they're like, "Oh, you perfectly captured between 21 and 22 in social media." So that's been fun to hear. What have you guys heard from your...
Go for it.
I've been hearing entirely different things depending on the age of the person I'm talking to. So like, if a fully grown adult that didn't live with social media, I will hear that like it was shocking and they were horrified, and like people my age were like, oh yeah, that was me, like that was what I experienced.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that factor of relatability. I mean, we had a screening in San Francisco probably a month ago, and I think for myself it was my favorite screening. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
With almost solely teenagers, and hearing them react to what they were seeing on screen and reading the comments, I think that really resonated with them. So it's been really impactful.
It really also reinforced the amazing quality of a theatrical experience, because it was a room full of teenagers, and they were like talking to the screen, like they were talking to their friends, and just like hearing them was everything. Like it was so great to hear them connect.
Great. Well, we'd actually love to hear comments, questions, mostly questions from you guys in the audience.
First, thank you for your film. I did not grow up with the social media, obviously. I'm the parent of now adult children and the grandparent of children who will be entering a media world slightly changed from what you all experienced. What I'm wondering as I watch the film, again, just the two of you, now a few years older than you were in the film, if you were to choose your parents' interactions with the world that you were living in and their influence on it, what would your ideal parent have done with or for you?
Both of our parents are here. I don't know.
Oh, I didn't know your mom. Is your mom your parent? You could speak honestly.
Yeah. I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, one of the best things that a parent can do to help a child safely navigate social media is really, really build their self-esteem. Because a lot of the desire to be on social media, a lot of the addictive qualities is that it really validates you. So if you have a child that is very secure in themselves and has very high self-esteem, they're not going to go, searching for it on Instagram or on TikTok and then likes. So that's probably one of the most important things.
I second that. I think I would also add having open, honest conversations and watching a show like this to really talk about what your child is experiencing online. I know both of my parents have been very transparent with growing up, and I think that helped me tremendously. But I also think conversations like these and curriculum based off of shows like these should also be in schools, and that media literacy should be a stronger component of the way we grow up, sort of as civics class is and was.
On that point, I should say we made an educational curriculum, and Jonathan actually helped us with that, and there's a parent guide in it too. But even without the parent guide, the show brings up what?
Mention where it's available.
Oh, and it's available at learner.org/social studies.
For free.
For free for teachers. And really, yeah, media literacy, just back to your political question too, is so important now to decipher where everything's coming from. I think one of the things that I learned as a parent was connected to what Ivy said about before I did this, I would blame my son for being on social without really taking into account that it's like a drug, like an opiate, and like we wouldn't blame an addict in that same way. And once I started kind of talking to him more about the effects and asking that he be more transparent about the time he was spending on it, and for that I actually demanded to look at the time once a week. Then we could have conversations about what to do with it that were a little bit more cooperative, rather than combative. Although it always kind of like if it's right after the withdrawal of the device, it always starts combative, because that was one of the things I was observing was like the kind of ornery, argumentative quality of somebody right after they're getting off the phone.
Thank you so much for bringing this film and your experiences to us here. I have a film and media history question. We know that every time there is a new medium, from cinema onwards, well, even before, but from cinema onwards, there is a moral panic around it. And people are going, oh, there are certain people out there who don't have the sensibility to be able to handle this. It's going to degrade them. It's going to, it's going to be a social problem. And this film, the framing of it is that when you were making it, this is a social problem, youth and social media, and it even brings with it the language of addiction, you know. And so my question is, when you were making the film, how did you not make reefer madness?
Well, I mean, when I went into it, I didn't exactly go into it as it was a problem. I went into it more as a question, like, what is the impact? And I think it's not as black and white in the sense that, you know, there are a lot of things that are vital that they get from it, like, and that we all get from it, like connection, finding like-minded people, finding community. There are these positive things, so I don't think it's like so much of a binary, but I think it's very different than any other media we've encountered. And my earlier work was about the influence of other media, and it wasn't a panic, it was a little bit more of a analysis, I would say, and kind of looking at the loss of innocence as a fact, but not as a judgment, and also the homogenization of youth culture also as a fact. There's something very different about social media, which is it actually is addictive. So it's not like it looks addictive. The TikTok research that the TikTok insiders did not want people to see, even their internal research says it's addictive after less than 35 minutes. So, and you know, you didn't even used to be able to use brain science to make products for kids. Like, my mother is a professor of psychology, and like there used to be some guardrails on marketing to young people. Now the engineers who know brain science are exploiting the most vulnerable qualities of the developing brains. So I think, you know, in episode 5, towards the end, when the kids are saying, like, can we talk without it? Can we get off of it? Sydney says it's kind of like the connection between cigarette research and lung cancer. Like, once people knew about that, there was action, and now we know that there's a connection between social media and eating disorders, between social media and suicidal ideation and depression and anxiety. So I think it is a justified panic. We have exploding mental health issues among young people, so much so that there isn't even enough resources, like psychological resources, to deal with it. I think, you know, Jonathan worked at Teen Line, as did a couple of the other kids, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer things that are happening and that are amazing, but I think adults are not meeting the moment. And so I think it is a justified panic, but you know, that's for each person to come to. I think that my feeling is at the end of it, though, it's not at the beginning of it. So I think that what you see in the show is an inquiry into how it's affecting, and each kid kind of has their own story. And, you know, if Keyshawn was up here, he's like super positive about social media, because for him it's a tool of social mobility, for him it's a tool of success. He doesn't get as affected by some of the negative sides as some of the other characters in the show. Same with Jack. I think Jack is not as affected psychologically and uses it more as a tool of business. So, you know, whether, you know, maybe not everybody agrees with the values of using it to make money or have a business, like a party business, but I think for what he's doing, he finds success through it. So I don't think it's as black and white, but yeah, as now I do feel like it's a problem that we need to address on a societal, collective level.
This is a question for Jonathan. Hi. I would like to hear more about the gendered and the whiteness in your experience. You touched upon the question of gender and the question of males' reactions and use of medias. I was struck in looking at these 2 episodes that it seems to be that you and some of the other male kids had a kind of entrepreneurial relationship towards social media that was different, or at least it seemed, at least in these 2 episodes. Is that something that is built in, or that you find more natural to certain male characters, or your experience as a man, rather than women? And it's your own project around that issue. I was wondering about your own interaction with Lauren's film.
Great question. Thank you, Professor Fogu. That's a really difficult question to answer. I think Ivy sort of touched on it when you touched on gender and how that affected your social media experience. But I think our individual qualities, in part because of the algorithm on these social media platforms and how much they know about us, filter the content we receive based on our identity, whether that's gender, sexual orientation, race, etc. And so I think the content I received growing up was much different than Ivy or Alec, who in the series explains about the Caucasian beauty standard. So I think it's a difficult question to answer, one, because so much of it is black boxed by these companies in terms of how the algorithms are created and how that affects users. But speaking for myself, I think it's one thing that I sort of wanted my parallel project to cover as well, which was these different yet ubiquitous experiences with social media. They weren't universal, but all the teens who I interviewed, and I think who Lauren interviewed, shared similarities among themselves. And so that was really impactful for me as well.
Yeah, thanks for a great film. So you alluded to filming over 3 years and 150 days total, and I'm thinking you had more time in the early, so the arc of time, the 5 episodes aren't chronological, is what I want to say. And I'm wondering how you structured each episode.
Yeah, it wasn't really 3 years. In my mind, it was 1 year because we followed a school year. But some of them say it was longer because we edited for 2 years after that. And sometimes in the editing process, we would do a pickup, or we would ask for something, some social media or something more. And then we started in the spring talking to young people and doing some test filming before we started in the fall. But the edit was this huge, crazy puzzle. I think we had 1,000 hours of footage and probably 2,000 hours of social media. And we edited for 2 years with 6 editors. And it was a puzzle because it was chronological, but it's also thematic. So it takes place over the school year. You see in episode 1, the school year begins, and in episode 5, the school year ends. And in the process, you have some markers, prom and graduation and Christmas. But each episode is a different theme. And so that is a function of both the themes that I felt we needed to cover because of the experiences that I heard and the stories that the characters went through during our filming, and also kind of how they connected with events that happened in those times. So the first one, as you saw, addresses bullying and slut shaming. The second one is very much about class and race, and we get a little bit into canceling, and in the third, it's called algorithm pressure, and it's college pressure, and it's eating disorders. And the college pressures tied, Jonathan was one of the kids going through that, but tied to the application process. And so we had a massive wall with 1 million cards, and we had that also in digital form so we could share it between the editors and with me. And we were making changes in order until the end. And what I did, which nobody does with series anymore, which really drove my producers crazy, but I felt like it was really necessary, is I didn't lock any of the episodes until the end. So it just doesn't happen anymore because people make series so fast and they have to lock one and start post and then go to two. That's way better from a production standpoint. But from a creative standpoint, I just always find like once I know my ending, I want to change the beginning. And I want to move pieces around. And so we were doing that until the very end.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Ivy. Thank you all for coming and spending the night with us.